Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. It's our summer reading episode, so we've got some recommendations. Like Silas House of Kentucky, whose latest novel draws on real-life changes in the weather.
I hear people in my family verify it. This didn't happen when I was growing up, but at the same time, sort of denying that it's, because of climate change.
Virginia author Barbara Kingsolver, winner of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction.
They say that every writer is really writing the same story over and over again. And if that's true, my story is about community.
And folklorist Emily Hilliard, whose book has a chapter on West Virginia slaw dogs.
The first mention of slaw that I could find was from a 1949 paper. Incarcerated people in the jail liked slaw on their dogs because they could smuggle in a razor blade.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Solar Holler, building on West Virginia's proud history of powering the nation by bringing solar power to the coalfields. More at solarholler.com.
Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I love books. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing like jumping into a mountain pond or ducking into an air-conditioned movie theater. But there's something particularly special about losing yourself in a book on a summer day. I can remember buying popsicles and comic books at the corner store in Clifton Forge, and sometime later obsessing over Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings. This summer, I'm reading Anne Pancake's Strange as This Weather Has Been and Alison Stein's Trashlands. If you're looking for summer book recommendations, well, we've got you. Let's start with a post-apocalyptic story that's also about the ravages of climate change. It's full of rich, vivid writing about the natural world and our inner lives, too. The book is Lark Ascending by Kentucky author Silas House. It came out last year and won the 2023 Southern Book Prize and the 2023 Nautilus Book Award. Then in April, House was named Kentucky Poet Laureate. Last fall, I spoke with House about Lark Ascending. Silas House, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia to speak with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Lark Ascending is a gripping novel. I understand you were in Heinemann in late July when the floods hit, so you have this book about a climate-changed world, and you're experiencing the effects of it firsthand there in Kentucky. What was that like?
Well, I was on my way to the Appalachian Writers Workshop at Heinemann, which was sort of the epicenter of the flooding. So I wasn't there, but I was there after the floods hit and worked in some of the flood relief. And I think, a whole lot of people realized climate change has come to us, and it's undeniable. In that particular flood, it was just so quick, and the rain was so violent. It's just undeniable that it's something new. It's something that we didn't experience in our childhoods. It's different. It's here.
What's your sense of how people in Appalachia feel about climate change? It seems like it's still politicized, but at the same time, people see the weather, and even if they don't believe it's man-made, they see the effects in the coal industry and the gas industry. What's your sense of where Appalachia is on climate change at the moment?
That's an interesting question because it makes me think of growing up, how important the weather was. Everyone commented on the weather all the time. And so I do hear a lot of people say, the weather's different. The weather has changed. But I also hear those same people sort of have been convinced by so many talking heads that climate change is not a real thing. So it's like on one hand, I hear people in my family verify it, by saying this didn't happen when I was growing up. But at the same time, sort of denying that it's, because of climate change. So I think, there's so much bad information out there, and sort of one of the best things about the internet is how much information it gives us, and also the worst thing about the internet is how much information it gives us.
Tell me a little bit how you conceived this story and then wrote it.
Well, the family who is at the center of this book they're from the West Virginia-Maryland border. They live in a very small town right there. The climate change has fueled ferocious forest fires that are spreading from the west. At the beginning of their story, they have to leave Appalachia, central Appalachia, and actually going up into Maine. And then from Maine, they go to Nova Scotia, then across the Atlantic, and finally to Ireland. So they're making this sort of epic journey out of Appalachia and across the sea to what so many people think of as a homeland of Appalachia. You know, when I think of contemporary Appalachia, I think that you just can't deny that our culture is such a tangled knot of Native American, African, and Scots-Irish influences. All three of those cultures come together to make the Appalachian culture, to my mind. And so in a way, this family's sort of making a reverse journey. So I do think of it as sort of a global Appalachian story. And I also think, to go back to the flooding, a lot of people have talked about Appalachia as a refuge when climate change, goes into higher gear. But in fact, I think Appalachian people are going to suffer greatly at the hands of climate change. And a lot of that has to do with the way that, it's been treated as a sacrificial ground for over a century by the rest of the country, the rest of the world, the way that has changed our topography, our drainage, our aquifers, etc. So I just don't think you can separate Appalachia from climate change and climate refugees, which is something we're going to be talking more and more about. So I was thinking about all those things when I was writing the book, and how we have to be thinking about those things. We don't have any choice now.
One of the things that strikes me about Lark Ascending that is very quintessentially Appalachian is the way in which you write these moments of joy into what is otherwise a dystopian story. Like there's one scene where Helen finds sardines in a canteen and red and purple socks. And the characters that are talking about are so excited and joyful about that. And then another section, they're describing how birds move and the passage of evening to night. Would you mind reading that excerpt from the novel where they're discussing that?
We walked into the purpling of evening, the gloaming, Helen announced, and I wondered how the world had known in all this time to start its way toward nighttime without Helen around to speak it into being. Why do you call it that? I asked her. She was balancing herself with her arms out as we crossed a jagged line of stones across a quickening stream. What would you have me say instead? Dusk, twilight, I answered, watching the cliffs above us. I was always more nervous around rushing water like this because it limited what we could hear of the rest of the world. But the word gloaming is so much lovelier, she said, as if that was the end. Tall pines loomed all around us, fragrant with sweetness, and then we came into a clearing where we could see the silhouette of mountains against the darkening sky. I should think we're 2 days' walk from Glendalough, Helen said, more to herself than me. Several starlings rose from an ash tree atop the wooded hill before us. At least 100 fluttered skyward. They all moved together, as if they could predict each other's movement. They swooped down and up, and in a spiral movement, an undulation, dozens of birds moving, as if they were of one mind. I had seen this happen before, but it always felt like a kind of magic. A murmuration, Helen breathed out.
Yeah, I'm struck by that mix of joy even within a dystopia. Can you talk about that aspect of the novel a little bit and how it reflects Appalachia?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that because, anytime you're writing a book that has an issue at its core, no reader will really care about that unless you create a human story that grows out of that issue. And so this is not a book, where you're constantly being harangued about climate change or the demise of democracy or things like that. but it is a book in which the characters have been affected by those things. But the most important part is the human story. You have to create characters that readers care about. And I hope that I've done that in this book. But it is a book about grief. To me, that's the central theme. It's about grieving the loss of someone you love. It's about grieving the loss of your country. It's about grieving the loss of normalcy. To sustain myself and the reader for almost 300 pages, I have to have these moments of joy and wonder and beauty throughout the book. And really, that's how we get through grief. The only way you can get through the darkness of grief is to recognize these moments of beauty and joy and wonder. And one way I'm able to do that in the book is that one of the main characters is a dog. And so, as far as we know, dogs are not aware of their mortality. The dog is not aware that it's walking through an apocalyptic landscape, and so the dog is able to hold on to this joy and this hope in a way that the humans cannot. And so some of the chapters are from the point of view of the dog. And, one of his great joys is olfactory. It's all about what he's smelling. And so I had to latch on so much to scent in this book. And when you're, spending years writing a book and you're thinking a lot about just the sensation of scent, it does make you think more about that sense of wonder and joy and those little moments of joy that really carry us through the darkness.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Seamus and Lark. Seamus is the dog, but that is the one of the few relationships in Lark Ascending that is completely trustworthy. There's no doubting, there's no distrust. And that seems like a theme too. There's a part where Helen, one of the characters, tells Lark, "Don't go trusting everyone, Lark. But if we can't trust a few people in this world, then there's no point at all. It's one of the things that gets us through." And that seems like a particularly resonant message in this time we live in, where there's so much division and distrust and polarization between people, even neighbors. What is that quote and that consideration of trust in relationships and Lark Ascending have to tell us about today and our life in Appalachia and the U.S. today?
Well, I'm afraid it just reveals more about me than anything else. And the older I get, the smaller my circle becomes, and I think the fewer people that I truly trust. And I just think that's a lesson of aging, that, you sort of gather in your true friends and your true family and you depend more on them. And it's really easy to understand those loyalties in a much deeper way. I turned 50 while I was writing this book, and I think that shaped a lot of my point of view on those things. But at the same time, I was thinking about, if you are a person who has lost everything and everybody, Lark has lost every person he's ever loved. And in the book, he's trying to create a family for himself in the form of this dog, Seamus, and the mysterious Irish woman, Helen. And so, he has to be very careful in creating this family. And one of the themes that runs through all of my work is the idea of created family. As a gay person, that's been a cornerstone of my life. You have to have not only a blood family, but a found family or a created family. And I think that's commentary on that, that a lot of the times this sort of found family is immediate. It's very instinctual. And so you have to really hone your trust instincts in that way. So that's what Lark is doing in the book.
Silas House, it's been wonderful having you on Inside Appalachia. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us.
Thank you so much for reading the book. I appreciate it.
That was Kentucky writer Silas House. The novel is Lark Ascending. If you pick up a novel and it's won the Pulitzer Prize, you can rest assured it's a solid read. Well, 2 Appalachian books have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. A Death in the Family by James Agee, which came out in 1958. And then, as of this year, there's Demon Copperhead by Virginia author Barbara Kingsolver. Last year, Kingsolver was Appalachian Heritage Writer-in-Residence at Shepherd University in West Virginia. While she was there, WVPB's Liz McCormick sat down with her to talk about Demon Copperhead.
What does it mean to be an Appalachian in your own experiences and your own words?
To me, it means home. It means recognizing and celebrating my own people. I grew up in the eastern part of Kentucky. I left my little rural town, as young people do. I lived all over the place on several continents doing, low-paying jobs. And as I traveled the world, and this country especially, I encountered a lot of shocking stereotypes, a lot of condescension. That made me mad. It still makes me mad. After trying out a lot of different places, I came back home to Appalachia. I now live on the other side of the mountains in Southwest Virginia, but it's the same culture. It's the same language. It's the same emphasis on community and resourcefulness and kindness that I grew up knowing and loving. So as a writer, I see it as sort of my mission to represent us in a way that is seldom seen and seldom understood outside of Appalachia.
So, Barbara, you've written a lot of diverse stories, ranging from novels, short stories, poetry. Some of these stories take us all over the world. What sort of impact do your roots, your Appalachian roots, play in your writing? With the Poisonwood Bible, it took place in the Congo. How does your background and roots here in Appalachia impact your writing?
They say that every writer is really writing the same story over and over again. And if that's true, my story is about community. If I really examine all my works, even though I work hard to make each one entirely new, not just a new place and set of characters, but asking a whole new question. I've written about climate change and why that's so hard for us to talk about. I've written, as you said, a book set in the Congo, which is about cultural arrogance and how, what one nation will do to another. So these are big, big questions, sort of urgent modern themes. But if you sort of dig down into the heart of every one of these stories, it's about community. What is our duty to our community? How do we belong to it? How does it belong to us? And how does that play against the really powerful American iconography of the individual? The solo flyer, the lone hero. That's supposed to be the American story. But as a woman and as an Appalachian woman, I always see all the other people behind the solo flyer, the people who gassed up his airplane, the women who packed his lunch, there is no such thing as a lone hero. I'm interested in the heroism of people who think they're ordinary and people who are helping each other, creating families for each other or safety networks for each other, who are aware of their indebtedness to their neighbors and their people.
Barbara, I understand that you've had a book hit bookshelves, a brand new book, and that is Demon Copperhead. I want to ask you to talk with us about this book and what can readers expect when they read this?
Readers can expect a page-turner. I live in deep, deep Southwest Virginia, which is the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. So we are living with this. And I wanted for several years to write about it, and I couldn't think of a good way in that would make this story interesting and appealing to people, to readers, because it's a hard subject. It's dark. It's difficult. Kids coming up in this environment. And then I sort of had a conversation with Charles Dickens, and I realized the way to tell the story is the way he told David Copperfield. Let the child tell the story. that's what I realized I needed to do. So this kid, who's called Copperhead because he has red hair. He has Melungeon heritage, if people know what that is. And he's the child of a teenage drug-using mother. He's born actually on the floor of her single-wide trailer home. And he comes into the world with this fierce, if a newborn can have an attitude, Demon has it. He tells you his story from his point of view, mostly taking place in his teens and early 20s as OxyContin is released into Lee County, where he lives. But he tells this story in a way that, in his own voice, in a way that will just give the reader a reason to turn every page, because you need to know how he's going to come through this, how he's going to survive, because he is a survivor. He's funny, he's fierce, and he's passionate.
That was award-winning author Barbara Kingsolver. The novel is Demon Copperhead. To hear an extended version of this conversation, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Coming up, we talk with Kentucky poet Frank X. Walker about his latest children's book and the roots of the Appalachian movement.
In my dictionary in 1991, the definition of Appalachia said white residents of the mountainous regions of Appalachia. And it shook me because I immediately thought, well, what are you if you aren't white?
You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.
"30 years ago, Kentucky poet Frank X. Walker heard Appalachians defined as, quote, the white residents of the Appalachian Mountains. That experience prompted Walker to coin the phrase Appalachia and co-found a group of black writers who represent the region. Now he's got a children's book. It's called A is for Appalachia. The book has been described as an ode to Appalachia for how it paints a portrait of black life in the region. WVPB's Eric Douglas spoke with Walker about the book. Eric started by acknowledging his own challenges trying to get into poetry.
I'm no stranger to literary pursuits, but I struggle with poetry. As a person who admits that they struggle with poetry, help me. Tell me what I'm missing, or tell me what I need to know that'll make it clearer for me.
Well, I don't know if I can make it clear. I can make you feel less responsible. I think the challenge of poetry is that a lot of other people, and not all poets, have given poetry a bad reputation because of the way it was taught in schools. If your first introduction to poetry is through a Shakespearean sonnet, and you're 15 years old, and everything about Elizabethan England is so far away from your world, versus your family and where you live and how you live and your diction and your language and your culture and your music. If none of that is in poetry when it's introduced to you, why would it not feel like a foreign concept? Poetry, I want to write poems that my grandmother might enjoy. Even my father with an 8th grade education, that he would hear these words and not have to run to a dictionary or feel left out, or even be mystified by the fact that he doesn't recognize the people being talked about, the places being talked about. But if he hears that work and it's in the form of a poem, and it sounds just like some of his favorite music on the radio without the music, then he's not lost. I think if you think of poetry as a cousin to say country music or the blues, and you get this, and you enjoy those two art forms, and you can enjoy poetry. And the only difference might be the subject matter.
Explain to me the genesis of roots of Appalachia. You're credited with coining that term, but also the Appalachian poets. And where did all that start?
Right here in Lexington, about 1991, I had a group of friends who were meeting once a week, sharing our brand new poetry only with each other. And we also started to go to public events. And we went to an event that was credited with being showcasing the best writers from Appalachia. And, we all enjoyed the event. And I came home and I looked up the definition of Appalachia. And in my dictionary in 1991, the definition of Appalachia said white residents of the mountainous regions of Appalachia. Mm. And it shook me because I immediately thought, well, what are you if you aren't white? If it's just based on the proximity to those mountains. And so I wrote a poem that kind of teased out that question. At the very end of the poem, I wrote the line, imagine being an Appalachian poet. And I brought that back to my group the next week to share. And I fell in love with the word and decided the same evening to name ourselves. We'd been meeting for about a year, unnamed, and not even thinking of ourselves as a group. But we decided at that moment that there was something about the word that was electric enough to make us feel something. And so we named ourselves the Appalachian Poets. And about 10 years later, the dictionary, based on the amount of use that was happening with the word in the region, picked it up and decided it was a legitimate word.
Why was it important for you to develop a children's book?
When you consider luminaries like Booker T. Washington and even the John Henry stories or Henry Louis Gates, Nina Simone, Roberta Flack, Bill Withers, they're always discussed separate from the space they come from. People almost never connect them to the region of Appalachia. So what I wanted to do was do a children's book that also educated the people reading to those children, because most of the stuff in the book, the children who might read these books, their parents don't know this information either. One of the most important parts of the book is the glossary, the 5 pages of glossary that comes at the end of the alphabet. And it gives you a brief history of all the significant figures and places and people that make up what I consider Appalachia.
Who do you want to read the book?
Grandmothers, parents, high school students, middle school students, young people who are literate enough to read on their own, and even people who just enjoy beautiful images, to flip through the book and enjoy the images, and then ask questions of whoever's there with you. I hope it's a multi-generational experience. Every family should own one of these books, in my opinion.
Frank X. Walker is a professor at the University of Kentucky. His most recent book is A is for Appalachia. Nonfiction books prove that real life can be every bit as colorful as fiction. Take the book Making Our Future, Visionary Folklore and Everyday Culture in Appalachia, by folklorist Emily Hilliard. Its every chapter contains bright descriptions of, quirky Appalachian culture, like indie pro wrestling and the sprawling online world of Fallout 76. Folkways reporter and resident foodie Zach Harold spoke with Hilliard about the book when it was published last year.
Emily Hilliard, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this amazing new book of yours.
Thanks so much, Zach.
Well, there's so much that we could cover. I would like to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, your chapter on hot dogs. Can you tell me about kind of how the craze began?
Well, it's kind of linked to industry and immigration and popularization of mass culture, urbanization, and European migration. So there were a lot of instances where basically Greek and maybe Italian immigrants were setting up hot dog stands in West Virginia And mostly that was in major urban centers in industrial areas. And I think that's why we see the hot dog really being popular in West Virginia in the southern coal fields, the northern coal fields, and then industrial cities like, the Ohio River towns of Huntington and Parkersburg. But hot dogs really seemed to boom in the 1910s and 1920s in West Virginia.
I love the line in the book from a Fairmont newspaper that calls Charleston, quote, one of the greatest places on earth for hot dog eaters.
Yeah, I know. That was amazing to find. I found this, I guess it was several articles about hot dogs in Charleston, and I found there were at least 4 hot dog stands in Charleston in the early 1920s, and 3 of 4 of them were owned by Greek immigrants. And there was this amazing stat in one of the articles. It said that 22,000 dogs a day were sold out of those 4 hot dog stands at one point. And that is about 1 for every 2 residents in Charleston at the time.
And then I have this highlighted in my copy. They describe it in a very evocative way, right? Like to help people conceptualize how many hot dogs that is. If all the hot dogs consumed in a year in Charleston were strung together, the string could extend to Huntington and back, and still have enough left to run down to St. Albans on the one side of the road and back on the other.
Yeah, and then I think it goes on to say, or it could go all the way to Morgantown.
And to return to your point, I found it interesting that it was so tied to industry. Because it's cheap, it's portable, right? This is the perfect thing for people who are, doing shift work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I talked to the descendants of A.J. Valos, who was a Greek immigrant born in 1894. And he had actually worked as an indentured servant in the hot dog industry in New York, and then moved to Parkersburg and opened the Broadway Sandwich Shop, which is still open. He opened that in 1939, and his relatives were saying that they thought that much of the success of his shop was because it was right across the street from the Mountain State Steel Foundries, and it was also close to a high school, so they got students from the school coming for a snack or for a meal, and then there were some other companies right nearby too, so factory workers would grab hot dogs before or after a shift.
Reading that section about the Broadway Sandwich Shop in Parkersburg, I've eaten there. I've had hot dogs there and had no idea of this history of it. That's what I love about this book, is that it really takes things that you think you know and explores the story behind it. Let's talk about the hot dog stand war of 1922 in Fairmont.
This was also something I found through looking through historic newspapers. But there was this flurry of activity in the Fairmont papers in 1922. City officials were upset with the clientele that these hot dog stands in Fairmont were attracting. And most of that is, seems like racist and classist resentment of the immigrant, Greek and Italian immigrants who were running these hot dog stands and wagons, and then also the clientele of high school students and workers. And they kind of equate them with like dive bars and beer joints, and attest that they are unsavory and kind of try to shut down some of these joints. And then there's sort of the counter response of someone writing in and saying maybe these city officials could worry about more important things than just shutting down hot dog stands. And then there's another newsstand owner who writes in, and he is incensed that because people had been thinking his newsstand was a hot dog stand, and he writes into the paper to assert that that is simply not true, and I don't want to be affiliated with that kind of base business.
So first comes the hot dog, and then comes the West Virginia hot dog, right? And you get into that history a little bit, which seems a little murky, right? Like, when did we start putting slaw on dogs?
The first mention of slaw that I could find was from a 1949 paper in Raleigh County, and it was about the jail. Incarcerated people in the jail liked slaw on their dogs because they could smuggle in a razor blade in the slaw. And I mean, that is another instance where it's like, is this kind of a joke column? And I think there was a little bit of humor to it, but it is kind of funny to think in this imaginary where that is why people started putting slaw on hot dogs. But Stanton from the West Virginia Hot Dog blog credits a Stop-Bet advertisement in the paper from 1922 that says something like, everyone's talking about the Stop-Bet's new dog with slaw. So it may have been popular in the state before that. We just don't know. But there were, traditions of coleslaw and cabbage, definitely with German immigrants and Eastern European immigrants who, were living in West Virginia at the time.
I don't think I'll ever look at a hot dog the same way again.
Well, hopefully that doesn't mean that you won't still enjoy it.
I love them even more.
Okay, good.
You've published a book. Authors have to do a certain amount of, self-promotion out there, telling people about the book coming out, letting them know they can pre-order it. You ran into a little bit of controversy on social media over hot dogs. Can you tell me what happened?
Yeah, well, I posted a map that my friend Dan Davis from Kinship Goods made for the book, and it's of the hot dog joints that are included in the book, most of them, but not all of them. And I think maybe people just didn't read that that's what it was for. And it went, I would say, it wasn't quite viral, but it had hundreds of retweets and responses, and people were just so mad that their favorite hot dog joint was not on this map. But I ended up, issuing a disclaimer and saying, this is not a value statement of the best hot dog joints. It's simply the hot dog joints, some of them that are listed in the book. And, it's not exhaustive by any means, and neither is the book. But I would love to see your hot dog map, which I'm serious about. I would love to see, a collection of people's, their favorite hot dog joints in West Virginia, or the ones where they have memories. I would love to see this collection of hot dog maps. And I think Dan is making some merch for it too, which might inspire more controversy, but hopefully not.
Or maybe hopefully so, because like you said, if we generate enough controversy, this will lead to the creation of rival hot dog maps, and then we just have that's a whole nother chapter in your next book.
Totally, yeah. That would be fun.
Emily, I just want to say, I feel like the state of West Virginia owes you a profound debt of gratitude for the work and love that you've put into this book, whether we're talking about your chapter on hot dogs like we have today, or your chapter on the author Brees DJ Pancake, or the chapter on the teachers' strike, or the one on independent pro wrestling. What we've ended up with is a book that you could put in somebody's hands and say, this is why West Virginia is special. This is what makes us who we are. And I'm just so glad that you've given that to us.
I really appreciate that. And this is sort of in a way, it's a love letter back to the state in all its complexity, I hope.
My baby works in a hot dog stand, making them hot dogs as fast as she can. Up steps a cat and yells, don't be slow.
Making Our Future, Visionary Folklore and Everyday Culture in Appalachia is published by the University of North Carolina Press. That interview was part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. To hear it again, or any of our other 130-plus Folkways stories, visit our website, wvpublic.org. It's always nice to have a book of poetry in your summer reading mix. We suggest any of the 8 volumes of Women Speak, an anthology that collects the work of Appalachian women. It's edited by Carrie Gunter Seymour. Gunter Seymour is also Ohio's Poet Laureate. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with her about poetry, getting published in Appalachian, Ohio.
I just want to preface this with saying, you know, a lot of people don't realize that a quarter of the state of Ohio rests in Appalachia proper, and that there are pockets of Appalachians scattered throughout the state that are still adamantly connected with their Appalachian roots. We just happen to, you know, our people migrated during the Great Depression and World War II. You know, even though many of us live in northern Appalachia, a good many of us have strong southern roots as well. Mm-hmm. But we've kind of adapted to northern ways based on the landscape and the growing seasons, you know, what the land provides by way of you know, the quality of the soil and the weather and the Lord and all those things that are so important, you know, to growing and maintaining. But we all take great pride in our Appalachian heritage and our people. And I write a lot about my people. But this particular poem is about all of that. It's about the land and the people and this false impression that people have of Appalachians, that we're all just kind of lazy and don't work hard enough and could do so much better. And I think we're doing great. So this is called To No One in Particular. I'm never happy to see summer go, earth stripped of its finest voice. I'm sitting outside in my heavy coat, porch light off. There is a full-on moon. No ambient distractions. The sky a Zion. I take solace in considering the age of this valley, the way water left its mark on Appalachia long before Peabody sunk a shaft, Chevron augured the shale, or ODOT dynamited roadways through steep rock. I grew up in a house where canned fruit cocktail was considered a treat. My sister and I fought over who got to eat the fake cherries. Standouts in the can, though tasting exactly like every other tired piece of fruit floating in the heavy syrup. But it was store-bought, like city folks. And we were too gullible to understand the corruption in the concept. Our mother's home canned harvests, superior in every way. I cringe when I think of how we shamed her. So much here depends upon a green cornstalk, a patched barn roof, weather, the Lord, community. We've rarely been offered a hand that didn't destroy. Inside the house, the light bulb comes on when the refrigerator door is open. My husband rummages a snack, plops beside me on the porch to wolf it down, turns, plants a kiss, leans back in his chair, says to no one in particular. A person could spend a lifetime under a sky such as this. Stands, bows, offers his hand, sings. Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Come and dance with a man with a hole in his stocking. His knees are a knocking, but his feet keep rocking. Come dance with a man with a hole in his stocking. We'll dance by the light of the moon. Let us dance by the light of the moon.
I love that.
That's my little protest poem.
Parts that reminded my childhood right away with the canned fruit and remembering that with my sisters and yeah, we would
I think I was more into the pineapple pieces, but yeah, it all did taste the same, and it was like a big treat, and it was just canned. Yeah, that's wonderful. Poet laureate, how did you get to here, where you are now?
I didn't start writing poetry until 2009. I had begun journaling. I had a life-altering circumstance that I was trying to get through, and we talked earlier about the athletics and getting pretty crazy about the workouts. And it was all trying to deal with anxiety. And I started journaling and started sharing some of my thoughts with people as I would, try to get out and listen to others who were writing and talking about the same kind of situation. And someone said to me, you ought to try writing poetry because it will make you focus in tightly. Because in poetry, you try to look at every single word and find the perfect word, every single word, because you're using a lot less words, so they need to be pretty perfect. And that was life-altering for me because it really did. It helped me deal with my chaos. It did help me focus in. It did make me think more clearly about things and less irrationally. And so I felt like it was so therapeutic and so healing. And so then I got kind of obsessed with that, the way I had about, working out. So between the two of them, the working out and the poetry, I felt like I got my life back into control. Though I will tell you those early poems were pretty horrible. But I just kept going and I kept reading other poets and I kept attending readings. I did some workshops. I certainly don't profess to be one of the best poets on the planet or anything like that. But I do love poetry and I love people and I love helping other people. And so I was the poet laureate of Athens County, Athens, Ohio, when the call came out on the state level. And there were several really good, wonderful folks who encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring, so to speak. And they nominated me. And then through the process of the submission process and the interview process, then I do believe there were 3 to 5 of us packaged up, on paper and sent to our governor, Governor DeWine. And Governor DeWine made the final choice.
What was it like the first time you were published?
I tell people, please don't write your work with the idea of getting published, because I think sometimes we stray from the healing and the therapy of poetry when we're trying to write something that an editor might like and might want to publish. That said, the first time you get published, I don't think there's anything like it. It is the most amazing feeling it's a validation of sorts, and you really don't want it to be that way, but it is. It really is. And for me, to top it all off, my very first publication was with Still the Journal, which is to me the finest Appalachian journal on the planet. And to have been accepted there in the very early days of my journey as a poet is just, there's almost not words to explain it. I hope you can hear in my voice how excited I am to occasionally appear in that marvelous, wonderful journal. And the folks there work so hard to lift up new voices and those voices who they feel represent the region. And so, yeah, it was something.
Carrie, thank you so much.
Oh, it was so nice to meet you, Bill. And thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm just so honored and thrilled.
The poetry series is called Women Speak. The newest volume features a piece by another of our favorite authors, Nima Avashia. The Women of Appalachia project is accepting submissions for its next edition, June 29th and 30th. For details, visit our website. We hope you found something from this episode to add to your summer reading list. I'm going back to finally finish a book I started years ago called If Trouble Don't Kill Me. It's a bit of family history by Western Virginia writer Ralph Barrier about his grandfather and great-uncle, who became a famous brother music duo in the 1930s and 40s, until they were sent off to fight in World War II. What are you reading this summer? Maybe a cool mystery or biography? Or maybe some cryptid fanfic? Let us know. by emailing us at insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Maybe we'll feature it in next year's episode. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Del McCurry, The Appalachian Roadshow, Little Sparrow, Buck Owens, and Tim Bing. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, educating the people of our region and beyond for more than 150 years. More information at concord.edu.